Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this book reading session. It's not exactly a book reading, but it's a reading session. So, and Professor Raghavan, G. Srinivasaraghavan, will talk about modern Sanskrit literature today. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you. It's a pleasure to have Professor Raghavan with us today. May I request Shivangi to introduce the speaker, please, and then we can get on with the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. Welcome to our book reading session by Professor G. Srinivasaraghavan. Professor Raghavan is a faculty member at IIIT-Bangalore, and his research interests are in the area of machine learning. Professor Raghavan did his PhD in computer science from IIT Kanpur, had a postdoctoral stint at the IMSC in Chennai, and subsequently spent several years in the industry in a variety of roles. He has a deep interest in music as well as in sports. Professor Raghavan dons multiple hats at the Institute. Given his multifaceted interests as one of the organizers of Yamini, an annual Dusk to Dawn musical fest, as well as faculty in charge of sports and games. He also serves as the faculty in charge of placements and internships. Today, Professor Raghavan will be talking about a glimpse into modern Sanskrit literature. Sanskrit language and literature have a hoary history dating back at least 3 to 4 millennia. Sanskrit is popularly associated with devotional hymns and chants, which indeed is invariably the first introduction to Sanskrit for most people. Such traditions and the diminution of sizable communities actively speaking the language have often led to several preconceived notions about Sanskrit, such as it being an ancient language in India, it being dead and obsolete today, it being a quintessential Hindu language, and so on. The truth is far from this, and Professor Raghavan hopes to dispel these myths in this talk by giving a glimpse of creative, secular Sanskrit literature that has emerged in the last 50 years. Sanskrit, therefore, remains a curious case of being one of the oldest languages in the world, still very vibrant in terms of literacy activity, yet with hardly any speaking population. We warm-heartedly welcome you, Professor.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. And thanks, Amit and Jaya, for organizing all this. It's been a very interesting series of talks so far, and I hope to continue the tradition through this talk. So I picked this, I guess, primarily because of my interest in Sanskrit. And also, I thought this would be something different from what you have probably seen in this series so far, right? So as Amit rightly pointed out, it's not going to be exactly a book reading session, but it's going to be a reading session, definitely. I'm going to read quite a few verses, all in Sanskrit, and I'll give my little commentary here and there as and when I see it fit. Now, before I get on to the actual stuff that I've put together in these slides, I want to give some background on my journey into Sanskrit, and I think that's I mean, also as a sort of I mean, telling to myself about the credibility that I have in being able to give a talk of this kind. I'm obviously not a scholar in Sanskrit. By no means am I that. But yes, my interest in Sanskrit has been around for a very, very long time. As was read out in the abstract, yes, my introduction to Sanskrit also was with the usual hymns and shlokas. I mean, my father did make sure that I had a whole bunch of these things by hearted by the time I left school, which included quite a bit of Bhagavad Gita, a lot of shlokas from all over the place, and both in Tamil and Sanskrit. But obviously that wasn't anywhere near being sort of formally learning Sanskrit. Yes, I did have Sanskrit in school, but that's pretty much what it was, right? But beyond that, a real sort of formal learning in Sanskrit did not really happen. And yeah, surprisingly, but then my interest in Sanskrit did continue. I guess more so because of my deep involvement in music, and I will talk about a little bit towards probably the end of the talk. Um, yeah, so my interest, which was sort of passing, and but that remained, it really took off again, of all places, in IIT Kanpur. It so happened that when I was doing my PhD at IIT Kanpur, both my masters and PhD, um, there was a group in the computer science department at IIT Kanpur that was led by Professor Rajiv Sangal. They were doing a lot of work on NLP those days. It was a very different sort of NLP than the sort of NLP that you see today. Obviously, there was no deep learning and stuff like that. It was all rules driven, and it was a classical sort of linguistics based NLP. And they were trying out a fairly ambitious project where they wanted to build cross language translators, particularly for Indian languages. And the idea was to use a sort of synthetic intermediate language, and they zeroed in on a Sanskrit lookalike, which is not exactly the full-fledged Sanskrit, but something which mimics, maybe a very watered-down version of full-blown Sanskrit. And the idea, I guess, was to leverage on the strengths of the Paninian framework for building a grammar for a natural language. And a lot of the grammar that they built for this intermediate language was based on Panini's Ashtadhyayi. Now, for them to help with this project, particularly in the Sanskrit side, they wanted an expert in Sanskrit, and they had a person who was actually doing his PhD in Sanskrit in Tirupati University. And he had come over to IIT Kanpur. He actually, and the work that he did with this group was actually formed his PhD thesis. Finally, when he submitted it in the University of Tirupati. And he spent close to 3 to 4 years at IIT Kanpur. And he found that somehow, we were all in the same department, so we started interacting, and he found that some of us were actually interested in Sanskrit. And there was a very loose group that was formed, and we started discussing Sanskrit. And obviously this person, this friend of ours, was our mentor of sorts, and he was sort of hand-holding us on the formal aspects of grammar, and it was amazing. I mean, I guess of all the learning that I've sort of gone through colleges and universities and all that, this was probably the one truly almost surreal sort of experience in learning. I mean, there was no pressure. There was, we didn't have a goal. There was no syllabus. There were no exams, nothing. But then we just went on and on. I mean, we used to meet very regularly, at least once a week, and for about 2-3 hours at a time, and very intense discussions, of course, led by this friend of ours who indeed was an expert in Sanskrit. And we actually covered quite a lot of Sanskrit, including, starting from the grammar to some parts of Vedanta, Upanishads, some Kavyams and Puranas, all kinds of stuff. And he used to sort of jokingly tell us that you guys have gone 2/3 of your way through an MA in Sanskrit. So that the amount of learning we had in Sanskrit was just simply amazing, and it was really really enjoyable. I mean, it's not that I didn't enjoy my computer science. Of course I did, but then I'm sure all of you know that the moment you have exams and deadlines and stuff like that thrown in, it does rob you of quite a bit of the joy of learning. But here it was completely pure, unadulterated joy of learning, and that's really the thing that I liked about my journey in Sanskrit. And of course, that's I've been keeping that alive by the sort of reading that I've been doing, and also using whatever Sanskrit that I was exposed to during my stay at IIT Kanpur to dig into some of the older texts in musicology that came up in the last maybe 300 to 400 years. Yeah, by the way, I mean, the development in musicology through some of these texts like Chaturudandi Prakashika and Sangeeta Saramrita and things like that. They are sort of unique in music, and that's probably one thing that distinguishes Carnatic music from Hindustani. The development of very very deep musicology, the practice of music which flowered maybe 250 years ago um, um, because of the Trimurtis, um, the trilogy of composers in Carnatic music, Tyagaraja, Muthuswami Dikshitar, and Shama Shastri. So they actually gave it a form, but then a lot of theory had been developed before that, and they basically gave it a concrete shape when they composed their compositions. So I did want to get into that a little bit, and all the Sanskrit that I had picked up did help me get a feel for how music had evolved during the three sort of 400 years, particularly the South Indian form of Indian classical music. Yeah, so that's my journey into Sanskrit in brief, and I was pretty excited when the series was announced, and I thought it will be appropriate for me to talk a little bit about Sanskrit. Okay. Yeah. So now coming to what exactly in Sanskrit am I going to talk about? This was something I was toying with. I didn't quite, I mean, make up my mind for quite a long time on, yeah, and I mean, talking about the well-known things like say Kalidasa and Bhasa and people like that, I thought was maybe run of the mill, and I guess most of you have heard of these things. But what is probably a surprise for many people is the fact that Sanskrit is still alive and kicking, been very, very vibrant. I mean, it's not just alive and kicking, it's the amount of activity that is happening in Sanskrit literature is just mind-boggling. And what I wanted to yeah, give you a glimpse of is just that, right? And obviously, I'm not going to be able to do justice to all the action that is happening in Sanskrit literature. Yeah, but at least a very, very, small glimpse into what is happening out there. Okay. Yeah. So um, I'm not getting into the history of Sanskrit as a language, Sanskrit literature, and that's too big a topic to be I mean, to be able to do justice to in 1 hour, and that's not certainly the focus of this talk. Okay. Yeah. So before we begin, just a couple of and again, um, uh, uh, all the pieces that I'm reading out here are all modern in the sense. I mean, they were all of them were composed certainly not more than 40, 50 years ago. And there is, and in fact, there is the last little couplet that you will see in this presentation is one that came up just a couple of weeks ago, or maybe just a week ago. Okay, so it is as recent as that, and Yeah, so all the people that you see here, the names of the poets and all that, they're all very, very recent. There is nothing which is classical in that sense. Okay, and also the selection of some of these, I wanted to highlight things which are not exactly sort of follow. I mean, which are sort of breakaways from the classical mold of compositions in Sanskrit. So people have been experimenting. So that's the other message that I sort of wanted to bring out through this talk. Okay, yeah. So just a couple of poems about Sanskrit itself as a language. Yeah, another thing that I wanted to do before when I go through this, I'm going to read out a lot of this stuff because I think one of the strengths of Sanskrit is in the I mean, the lyrical beauty that you can bring about in these, and that really comes out when you speak it aloud. So traditionally, when Sanskrit is taught, you're actually asked to say it aloud, and I guess that holds for a lot of poetry, maybe across languages, but I would certainly think it is particularly true of Sanskrit. Okay, the beauty is just not there if you silently read it. Okay, so the lyrical beauty is directly tied to the phonetic arrangement of the sounds that go into making up a piece of poetry. So this is a popular poem on Sanskrit. This is by a person by name Vasant Gadgil, Sanskrit Geetam. You actually find it in quite a few of the elementary school textbooks in Sanskrit. So it says Sarasa Subodha Vishwa Manognya Lalita Hridya Ramaniya Amritavani Sanskrita Bhasha Naiva Klishta Nacha Kathina. So the refrain here is Naiva Klishta Nacha Kathina. Naiva Klishta means it's not obscure, it's not something that is dead and gone, it's not something which is ugly, difficult. I mean, there are multiple interpretations you can give to the word Klishta, and neither is it difficult. That's basically the refrain that every single couplet in this poem. This is not the full poem. I've just picked the first and the last. Yeah, so it is easy, it is soothing to the heart, it is nice to hear, and so on. The last couplet says Kavi Kula Guru Nava Rasonmeshaja Rutu Raghukumara Kavita Vikrama Shakuntala Malavika Naiva Krishta Nachakathina. So here he's referring to Kalidasa. Kavi Kula Guru is referring to Kalidasa, and those words that you see there, Rutu is Rutu Samharam, then Kumara Sambhavam, Vikramorvashiyam, Shakuntalam, Maladekagnimitram. So it is basically compressed all the well-known kavyas of Kalidasa into this nice shloka. Okay, so all these are there in Sanskrit, and neither is it ugly nor is it difficult. So that's basically the point. Okay, this is another little poem, Girvana Bharati. This is again one stanza from a largish poem of hers. Okay, this is again another thing that people might be surprised about. There are quite a few women poets who are pretty active in Sanskrit literature. Okay, and this first one, the second one that you see is actually a lady Sanskrit poet. Yeah, so Sarva Shastramaya Grantha Virajante Yadashrayah Manavaha Sanskrito Yasmat Tadgyeyam Sanskritam Sada Vayam Sarve Namakurmaha Tubhyam Girvana Bharati Vasatvam Nanu Jihvagre Sarva Vidya Prada Bhava. So please reside on my tongue. And so Vasam Tvam Nanu Jihvagre. I'm not going to give every single sort of word by word meaning. I don't think that that makes sense, and I don't think I'll have the time to do that either, but I'll just pick some things at random and maybe things that are probably important for this, and I will move on. Okay. Yeah, so it's again talking about the greatness of Sanskrit. It encompasses all the shastras and so on. Okay. Yeah, so that's quickly about Sanskrit. Now this is what I had in mind. I had yeah, I had a couple of more things here, but then I thought I wouldn't be able to accommodate it in this 1 hour, so I removed it. This is just to give you a feel for the sort of spread that is there in Sanskrit literature today. And the two big things that I'm missing, which I had actually removed, are short stories, Laghu Katha, and the big novels, right? Yeah, the fictional novels. So I mean, so those two I haven't been able to accommodate, but believe me, there is enough and more in every one of these. So so the way I've organized this talk is I'm going to give maybe a couple of slides of examples for each of these, and things that I've just picked. I mean, either for their uniqueness or I mean, at worst, it's just a random pick, which I thought was sort of eye-catching. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to give some examples of works on translation from other languages, and there is so there is tremendous amount of activity here, which from a lot of other languages. I mean, including foreign languages. Indian as well, from Bengali, from Odia, from Hindi, from Tamil, from all over. Okay, and then there is a lot of new kind of poetry which is clearly different from the sort of poetry that we are used to seeing in classical Sanskrit. So I'm going to give a few highlights of those. There are again pieces of drama, again very different from the classical drama. There is a lot of children's literature that is coming up, and I've actually come across maybe I've seen a list of at least 50 to 60 collections of children's stories and kavitas and things like that, all in the last few decades. Okay, and there are epics, epics in the same mold as the big epics, probably not as big as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but certainly matching many of the things, epics that the Mahakavyas, as they refer to them in Sanskrit, that came up in the last 1,000 years or so. And the big names there being obviously Kalidasa, Bhasa, Dandin, and people like that. Okay, and so there are huge sort of poetic compositions like this being composed as we speak. Okay, and I wanted to give an example of something like that. And there is a lot of humor, satire sort of works that are also being, which is again not very common to see in the olden Sanskrit, but this is a pretty recent phenomenon that is happening. And after that, I'll just conclude. Okay, so that's how I've organized the talk. Yeah, translation. The first example that I picked was again you can see the dates for many of these. This is 2008, just about 10-12 years ago. This is a translation into Sanskrit of Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali. What you see on the right is Tagore's own translation of his Gitanjali into English. The original was, of course, as you all know, was in Bengali. And yeah, it is the English version that and the Nobel committee got to see, and they gave him the Nobel Prize. So this is his own translation. Okay, and this is the translation into Sanskrit. So he's basically talking about how he would welcome death when it comes knocking at his door, and very beautifully written. And yeah, obviously you do lose quite a bit when you translate. The poetic beauty of the original Bengali is certainly lost when, I mean, even though it is translated by the the same person who wrote the original. Yeah, so you can see Mrityur bhavati te bhrityo mamadwari satisthati agyatasya samudrasya taranam tena sadhitam. So agyatasya samudrasya taranam. So you can see that he has crossed the unknown sea. Agyatasya samudrasya is the unknown sea, taranam, after crossing it. And he comes to my doorstep. Tatha tena tava ahvanamanitam me grihampati andhakaramayi ratri machittam bhayasankulam. Andhakaramayi ratri, dark night. Tathapi deepamadaya dwarasyodghatanam mama acharishyami natvaham satkarishyami chapitam. So though I'm a little scared, I'm going to go with a lamp and I'm going to open the door. Udghatanam, dwarasya udghatanam is opening the door, and acharishyami natvaham satkarishyami chapitam. So I will do the satkara to him, and I mean, whoever is your messenger who's going to come and pick me up. So yastisthati mamadwari sate sandeshavahatah kritanjaliraham sastram pujayishyami tam tatha madihrit sampatti sanchayam tasya padayoho sthapayitva karishyami tadiyopasanamaham purayitva tasya dautyam parityajya mamoshasi तिमिरेनावृतामेकां छायां स प्रतियास्यति मदीये शून्य भवने ममात्मैव निराश्रयः क्रियमाणं ते मदीयान्त्यार्पणं यथा. Antyarpanam is my last offering. Arpanam is offering. Antyarpanam is the last offering. Okay. Yeah. So this is an example of a very recent translation of Gitanjali of Rabindranath Tagore. Yeah, the next example that I wanted to give was, this is slightly older, 1978. Yeah, so this is a translation of the very, very well-known Tirukkural in Sanskrit, in Tamil. So Tirukkural is a work by Tiruvalluvar. Yeah, is certainly considered one of the greatest literary pieces in Tamil, in classical Sangam Tamil at least. And yeah, so this is 1,300 odd little aphorisms. I mean, I shouldn't even call them couplets. So this is pretty unique meter, and it's extremely hard to capture this in any other language if you want to translate it. And neither has the Sanskrit translation actually done justice to it completely. And it is the standard, the Anushtup meter, which is sort of symmetrical, but the original Tamil is actually sort of 1.5 kind of. The second one is probably a little more than half the length of the first line. So this is a very very unique meter, and it did raise a lot of controversy when it was written by Tiruvalluvar, and it took a lot of sort of campaigning in some sense by him for it to be accepted by the literary community then. Okay. Yeah, so I've just picked a few random couplets from this. So Karka Kasadara Karpavai Katrapin Nirkadar Kutaha. This is the Tamil thing. Yeah, Adhyetavyaha Same Granthaha Nisandeham Yathartha. You can read the English one. So basically it says you acquire the knowledge that is worth acquiring thoroughly, and then after you do it, please live up to what you have learned. Okay. So adhita grantha drishtena patha yuktam pravartanam. So patha is the path. Drishtena patha. So whatever whatever is shown by what you have learned. Yeah, adhita, having learnt it, yuktam pravartanam. Please make sure that you walk along that path. Okay. And yeah, kannudayavar என்பவர் கற்றோர் முகத்திரண்டு புண்ணுடையவர் கல்லாதவர். There is something so cryptic and beautiful about the original Tamil version, and you actually wouldn't see it in the Sanskrit one, or for that matter any other translation. But I thought it's a good example of an attempt to translate something like this. And it's this is not something that happened maybe 500 years ago. It's quite recent. Okay. So what this is saying is kannudayavar enbavar. The people who have eyes are actually the people who have learned, who are learned. People who haven't learned have two sores on their face. That's basically what the original says. And chakshur mantasta evasyuhu jnana chakshur yutastu ye itaresham ubhe netre vrano syatam mukhothite. Vrana is sore, mukha uthite. So itaresham ubhe netre. The two eyes are basically sores on your face. That's essentially what it tries to say. So, Shevikka unavillada பொழுது, this is another popular திருக்குறள். Shevikka unavillada பொழுது சிறிது வயிற்றுக்கும் ஈயப்படும். So what it says is, if when I don't have enough food for the ears, then I shall give something to the stomach as well. So, Shrotram Shravana Rupanna Vihinam Syad Yada, when is Yada, Tada Deyam Dehasya Chapi Annam Shrotra Bhave Katham Shruti. So when it's not there, then is Tada Deyam Dehasya Chapi Annam Shrotrama Bhave Katham Shruti. Okay. Yeah. Now the this is something unique to yeah, probably not unique, but then yeah, it was it was certainly inherited from Sanskrit. The thing about sandhi, though it is the Sanskrit language is phonetically unambiguous. I mean, you know exactly how anything that is written in Sanskrit needs to be pronounced. So there is absolutely no ambiguity there. But then that should suggest that maybe reading Sanskrit should be very easy, because you know exactly how to pronounce it, right? Which is actually not the case for most of the languages. But then in practice, it doesn't turn out to be that easy. And the reason is you have all these compound words, though for every individual character that you see, the pronunciation is sort of determinant. But then when you want to read the word, unless you are able to split it correctly, it becomes quite a challenge to read it. So it does require some training in Sanskrit. There is a semantics involved, and unless you are comfortable with the semantics, reading is certainly not that easy. Okay. Yeah. So the English translation, again, I'm not terribly happy with the English translation either, but just for record, I put it here. This is by VVS Iyer, who happens to be a freedom fighter, revolutionary. He was a contemporary of Subramanya Bharati. Yeah. So so those are two examples of translations, very recent ones at that. And there are lots and lots of those, including translations of Shakespeare's works and all that. Okay. Poetry. Yeah, so again, I've picked a few ones which are deviations from the past. Yeah, so this one is in Sanskrit poetry. One free verse was not that. It probably didn't even exist. Maybe even a century ago. And second. I mean, there were lots of meters, prosodies that were employed. But what is happening of late is people are actually adopting meters which are sort of alien to Sanskrit, which they have borrowed from other pieces of literature. And a couple of the examples that I wanted to give today were those where the meter is not exactly one of the classical Sanskrit prosodic meters, but so like this one is a meter called Kundali, which is quite common in Hindi, but in Sanskrit it is quite recent. Yeah, so again, I'm not going to give word by word meaning, but I'll certainly read it out. Sajjana Maitri Santatam Sneha Bharam Pushnati Kramasho Vruddhim Upagata Doshanapi Mushnati. Doshanapi Mushnati Nirguno Gunana Dhatte Nirvedam Nirvasya Manasi Sammodam Datte Satkaryeshu Sahavardhini. So this is Satkaryeshu Utsahavardhini Jadata Jetri Snehasara Vishrambhasantata Sajjana Maitri. So it's basically about good friendship, association with good people or whatever, right? And this is interesting because if you look at the probably the most common meter in Sanskrit poetry, which is Anushtup. Most of the shlokas that you hear will all be in Anushtup. So Vishwam Vishnur Vashatkaro Bhuta Bhavya Bhavat Prabhu Bhuta Bhuta Vruddhavo Bhuta Atma Bhuta Bhavanaha and so on. Right? Paritranaya Sadhunam Vinashaya Judushpratam Dharma Samsthapanarthaya Sambhavam Yuge Yuge. All these are Anushtup, which is 8 syllables in each quarter of the couplet. Now here you see Sajjana Maitri Santatam is that part alone fits into Anushtup. That's 8. But then the second part is not. It falls short of 8. Sneha Bharam Pushnati. Here it's only 6. And so this is sort of unique, and this is borrowed from Hindi literature. And there is so there are a lot of adoption of Sanskrit poetry of this kind into meters that were earlier alien to classical Sanskrit literature. Okay, and here is another example. The couplet that you see on top is a ghazal, and there is actually a new genre of poetry that that is sort of flowering in Sanskrit. It's called Gajala Geetam, as I've written on the top, which is basically poetry which is modeled after ghazals in Urdu. Okay, and so this is I gave this example of the ghazal because the Sanskrit poem that I've written at the bottom is modeled after exactly the same meter as the one on the top. So शहर से यार सवार हुआ जो सवाद में खूब गुबार है आज दश्ती बहश उतैर उसके सरते जी ही में शिकार है आज. So that's the gate of this piece of poetry. So ayi chitta chirena vichintayatopi chanchalata nagata api nama nirantara yatna shataistava nishthurata nagata kiyadichhasi nirbhara shanti sukham न नियच्छसि पादमताभिमुखम् अयि गच्छसि साधुपथाद्विमुखं तव निष्क्रियता न गता न हि साधु जनैः सहसं रमसे न फलं विमलं त्वमिहा वहसे चपलाय सखे यहसे यतसे तव दुर्मदता न गता न हि दीनजनान् परितोषयसे बहुघोषयसे निजदान रुचिम् अयि चित्त सखे तव लोलुपता अनृतकीर्ति विना तगता न गता. Yeah, so this is you can see the broad meaning of this. Yeah, so this is sort of lamenting the waning of values in the modern society, sort of thing. Okay, so this is from the poem called Nagata by Bhatta Masarana Shastri. Okay. Yeah. The third example of poetry that I wanted to give was this is Gaddia Kavita, which is basically free verse. So there's no specific meter to this, and it is a cross between pure metered poem and a prose. Okay, yeah. So this is from a collection of poems called Vanavalli by Ravindra Kumar Panda. So this is a very contemporary theme. It speaks of the agony of many who suffer in a place where there is no appreciation of his or her talent, and they depict the miserable condition of laborers and downtrodden. So it's a very, if you see many of the classical Sanskrit literature, again, it's yeah, there is romantic literature. There is also a lot. Otherwise it is predominantly about kings and princes and princesses and things like that, right? You do see a lot of literature coming up these days, which have a very, very contemporary, which are based on very contemporary themes. Okay, ahameka ghati samarthyanusaram jalam dharayami mama ka trutihi. So I'm a pot, and I bring water according to whatever I am capable of. So what's my fault in this? Okay, if you think very lowly of me, that's really not my problem. Okay, santu sarovarajala bharaha nasti manasi kleshaha. Yeah, I'll feel bad if the lake from where I'm getting the water is not full. Aham anandito yadyapi simitam me yashaha. Though my yasha is my reputation, though it is limited, I am happy with that. That's so. These are just some random snippets from the from the larger poem. Okay. Yeah. So you do see, though it is prose, there is some sort of lyrical quality to this, and that's what makes it a poem. So yatra yatra pushpam tatra tateva kantakam tvam kasya padapasya pushpam hridayeshwari sada nishkantak. Okay. Yeah. So wherever there is a flower, there is these two are not related. I mean, they're from different parts of the larger poem. I just picked a couple of sort of random examples. Okay. Yeah. So wherever there is a flower, there is a thorn as well. But how come you are a flower who is thornless? That's basically what the second part says. Okay. Yeah. So again, the point is that these sort of works are very different from the sort of Sanskrit poetry that all of us are used to seeing. Okay. Yeah. Now drama. Yeah, I think I have just one example in this. Yeah. Sanskrit play is a massive subject. I mean, there is so much that has been written about Sanskrit play and drama and all that. Here, I'm just going to give you one nice example. There is it's probably not relevant now, but I think maybe say 30, 40 years ago, when radio was there was a new genre of Sanskrit plays that were emerging, which was, as you can see here, Akashvani Laghu Natakam. So these were dramas, Sanskrit dramas that were spoken, and they were relayed over the All India Radio. Okay, and it was part of the larger sort of agenda of educating people in Sanskrit and things like that. Okay, so this is just one, again, a random example from one Laghu Natakam by Kanti Gaur. So there's another lady, she's from Gujarat. This particular play, the name of the play is Shanka, it's doubt. Okay, so it's essentially about how misunderstandings develop in domestic life. So in this case, it is between a husband and a wife. So Priyambada is the wife and Priyankaraha is the husband. So he comes back late, and then she says, Janami Nirankushaha Purushaha Santi. Nirankushaha is there, I mean, you can't rein them in. They're basically vagabonds. They'll go around doing whatever they want. That's what she's saying. Okay, Purushaha, Nirankushaha Purushaha Santi. Okay, and then Priyankaraha, the husband replies, Satyam Yuktam Kenachit, Yoshitaha Kalaha Priyaha. Women are Kalaha Priyaha. They like to create trouble. So, Ai Katu Bhashini Kim Samastam Purushavargam Doshayati. Why do you blame all of the men folk? Rama Krishna adi sarve purushaha dosha yuktaha santi. Ayi priyam vade kena tava nama priyam vada nirnitam. Kena tava nama priyam vada nirnitam. Why is your name priyam vada? Natvam priyam vada kintu karkashasi. Okay. And the Priyamvada replies, Priyankaraha tvam tu bhayankarahasi. So a little bit of humor sort of thrown in. Yeah. So you're not Priyankara, you are a Bhayankara. You're a horrible guy. So okay. And so there is this is in again, I mean, one nice thing that you see in some of these is which is again a departure from the classical Sanskrit tradition. You don't see too many long words. I mean, you don't see a lot of words being strung together into sandhis and makes it so horribly difficult for people to read them. The words are all separate and fairly common words that are being used, and in a very sort of down to earth conversational sort of style. Okay. There is a lot of poetry of this kind, poetry, plays, even prose of this kind that is being written these days. Next is children's literature. As I said, there are several volumes of children's literature that you can see, and that have been written in the last 40-50 years. Yeah, and again, the attempt is to clearly make Sanskrit far more accessible than it maybe used to be earlier. Yeah, so like here it is. Chagi is a goat. Chagi rodati me. Bheri janayati shabdam bhe. Shishu marjaraha kurute meow. Veena janayati nadam tyam. It's a very nice for children. So this is from Shishu Geetika. Shishu marjaraha is a cat, the kitten, kurute meow. Yeah, Bheri is a drum, janayati shabdam bhem bhem. Veena janayati nadam tyam. Okay. And this is another little sweet poem for children. Aho priya me sundara gudika. This is about a doll. And so this is a child talking to its doll. Okay. Aho priya me sundara gudika. You're my beautiful doll. Mano mohika sundara gudika. I guess a lot of these words, I'm sure you would know if you're familiar with Hindi. You should be able to relate to many of these words, and that's one of the interesting things about this sort of Sanskrit that is being written today. Okay. Mano mohika sundara gudika. Iyam swapitihi mamaiva samipe vasati sadaiva mamaiva samipe. Always you stay only near me. Okay. Sakhyo me twa yanti cha chira sahachari madiya gudika. Okay. Ramate naya madiyam hridayam rakshami mam pitake sadayam taya vinano manoranjanam mano vinodakari me gudika. Okay. Your Taya vina no manoranjanam. Without you, there is no entertainment for me. And mano vinodakari, you actually make my heart happy. Mano vinodakari, me gudika, my doll. Okay. Yeah. So these were two examples of children's poetry, and again, this is just two random samples, and there's so much more of children's literature. There is children's drama, there are children's short stories, and the sort of Sanskrit style that you will see in most of those is very similar to this. It's not pretty accessible. Very few long sandhis and compounded words and things like that. And even the words that are being used are pretty commonplace. Okay. Yeah, and this is an example of the example that I'm going to give now on Mahakavyam, which is the epic. This is a very classical. I mean, it could pass off for one of the classical pieces of Sanskrit literature. Okay, it is in the typical um, Sanskrit literature mode, or the classical Sanskrit literature mode, and it's actually been categorized as a Mahakavyam. The example that I'm going to give by the IIT Academy, and so this particular piece of work, it is an outstanding 20th century work. This I think it was published in the 1970s by P.C. Devasya, and it follows works by Christian scholars in the 19th century, such as Giri Gita, Sri Yesho Saurabham. Yeshu is the Tamil, rather the Indian word for Jesus. So this is considered a Mahakavyam. Right? The title of this work is Krista Bhagavatam. Kristu refers to Jesus, and Bhagavatam is the epic, the life story of Jesus. Okay, and it is in 33 cantos, so it's a huge piece of work to signify the 33 years of Jesus Christ's life, and this won the author several awards and titles, and yeah, so just the fact that it's been sort of across the board recognized as a Mahakavyam is certainly pretty significant. Obviously there are people who think works like this, because it's about Jesus Christ and it's about Christianity and all of that, that it is part of a larger, you know, sort of missionary design and stuff like that, which I don't exactly subscribe to. But this is certainly one of the sort of outstanding works in the last 50 years or so. Okay. Yeah, and as I said, this is very classical in its moorings. Yeah. So apashyatam durata eva tau satim तुषारगौराभमुखीं सुमध्यमां घटे जलार्थं निहिते स्वमस्तके सलीलमारोपितहस्तपल्लवाम्. Okay, this is like most classical Sanskrit poetry. So it's describing the beauty. So there is I mean, much of Sanskrit literature is indulges in a lot of simile, upama, comparisons, and giving very figurative descriptions of events and people and all that. Okay, so these two are examples of that. So the first one is where it describes Mary, her beauty. Okay. Yeah, and the second one is a description of the sun. Okay. Yeah. Sansararti haram sanatana rasam yeshor mukhan nisrutam premod giti sudham pibanna prashamitottapo bhavan bhanuman samhrityashu karan vivesha vinayenastad driparshvasthitam Sandhyaraga kashayitambaradharo dhyanochitam gahvaram. Okay. Sandhyaraga kashayitambaradharo. The kashayitambara, ambara is dress, kashayitam is ochre. So ochre, the sun wears an ochre dress and then disappears into gahvaram, a cave, which is the fit place for it to meditate through the night and then come back next morning. So that's how he describes the sunset. Okay, so this is again, like much of Sanskrit poetry, it indulges in very elaborate descriptions of nature, comparisons with all kinds of things and stuff like that. Another interesting thing about Krista Bhagavatam is that he is drawn on a lot of Hindu mythology, including Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas, and all that, and he keeps drawing parallels with those, and that is what that is quite interesting. So this couple of examples of those दृष्ट्वा रूपान्तरं प्राप्तं येषुं सर्वे प्रकम्पिताः विस्मिताश्चाभवन् पश्चयन् विश्वरूपमिवार्जुनः. Pashchayan Arjuna. Arjuna saw the Vishwarupam of Krishna. Eva, like that, Drishtva Rupantaram, seeing Jesus transfigure, Sarve Prakampitaha, everybody was trembling. This is, and he draws a parallel with how Arjuna would have felt when he saw the Vishwarupam in Mahabharata during the war of Krishna. Okay, and here is another example. Labdhva dirghatapaha phalam narakulatratuhu shishor darshana datva cha shishamantimam munivarastebhyah kritartho bhavan trataram paripalya punya nichayir drishtva chiradagatam sriramam sharabhangatapasa iva swachhanta mrityum gataha. So this is about the sage Simeon, who was very happy that he can now leave this world because he has had the darshan of the child Jesus. And again, he draws a parallel with a story in Ramayana where Sharabhanga is waiting for somebody to deliver him from this world, and the moment he sees Sri Rama, he knows that his time has come, and he voluntarily dies. Okay, so there are lots and lots of examples like this of him drawing parallels with Hindu mythology. It covers pretty wide spectrum of Hindu mythology. Okay, the two examples that I've shown here, one is from Mahabharata, obviously the other one is from Ramayana, but there are lots and lots more. Okay, so this is an example of a Mahakavyam, and as I said, this is probably about 40-45 years old. Okay. And the last thing, so this is the last section that I'm going to end with. The humor satire, and these are sort of very, very recent, and probably just about a decade or two old, many of these things. Okay. Vyattananaha Shravana Karkasha Rukshakantha Kako Virauti Nikasha Twagehamekaha Labdhavakasha Iva Sansadi Dushtavakta Samanyamanav Sakhe Tava Dushprabhatam. So you see the satire here. So you normally wish a good morning, but he is wishing a bad morning. Why? I mean, Dushprabhatam is bad morning, obviously. And Tava Dushprabhatam. And the reason is, he's saying that is because of all the sort of nasty things that are happening in the society. And the entire poem is, and even the name of the poem, Sri Samanya Suprabhatam. So this is the sort of Suprabhatam that the common folk are sort of faced with in their day-to-day lives. Okay, and you can see the meaning on the right hand side. So Samanya Manava Sakhe. Sakha is a friend. So my dear sort of common man friend, bad morning to you. Okay, and the second one, Sachivam Kopya Hashatam Dehi Shavam Patrakarturatha Sanskruturtum Datvaham Sahasram Satu Kuru Turnam Patrakartur Dashakasya. Okay. So as you can see the meaning there. Okay. So Shatam Dehi is 100. Shatam is 100. Patrakarta is the media guy. Okay. And Sanskriti is the Antim Sanskar, right? So the last rites for, obviously a politician would want the last rites performed for every journalist that is out there. So that's the sort of message that this is giving. The next one, okay, sorry. Okay, so this is a sort of parody. Okay. Sammarjani Shatakam. So normally you hear about I mean Shatakams or I mean Ashtotra Shatam and stuff like that for the things that are revered. So you usually have shlokas and things like that in the form of shatakams, but here there is a Sammarjani is broom, the shataka dedicated to a broom. Okay. Badhnati Kankana Gunam Karayordayam Karayoryadayam Badhva Janas Satata Rikta Kalatra Bhave Badhnati Marjani Tavapi Tadaiva Sutram Ashranta Tatkara Parigrahanadhikare. Parigrahana is to hold. Tatkara, your hand. Tatkara Parigrahana Adhikare. And the next one is also interesting. So he's again the titles are quite interesting. Kantakanjalihi. I mean, Kantaka is anything which it's a spoke that stops good things from happening. So Kantakanjalihi is the Anjali to the Kantaka, and this guy's pen name is Kantaka Arjuna. Okay. Nityam Vyomarataihi Parairnabhasinah Sima Samullanghate Nityam Gnantyam Abhipatyanaha Krishikarana Rakshakaranscharayah Nityam cha Swabhuvos Madiya Janatam Krauyan Nirasyantite Nityam chapi Vayam Bala Pratibalam Lekhottaram Kurmahe. Okay. Nityam chapi Vayam Bala Pratibalam. I mean, retaliation. How? By writing in newspapers. So basically, it's taking a dig at how weak we are in our responses to enemy sort of intransigence into our territory, stuff like that. And the last one, so this is the last example. This is what I said is something that came up, I guess, just about a week ago. I don't know if any of you can guess this. This is या कापि मतसंख्यास्तु मया निर्वाचनं जितम् इति श्वेतनिवासस्थो ब्रूते कश्चिन् नराधमः. Shvetanivasa is White House. So now you can guess what he's referring to. Ya kapi mata sankhyastu. I mean, no matter what the count of the votes is, maya nirvachanam jitam. My election, I won my election. Okay. Iti, so says, Shvetanivasastho brute kaschin naradhamaha. Brute is saying, iti is so. So says the Kaschin Naradhamaha, Nara Adhamaha, a lowly human being who stays in the White House. So, I'm sure you know what whom this one is referring to. And this came up when all the election drama in the US was happening. I just have one more slide, and this is something that I wanted to. And this is not exactly in line with the theme of this talk, but given that we are, when Deepavali is just around the corner, I thought I'll include this as a tribute to one of the greatest, one of the three Trimurtis of Carnatic music, Muthuswami Dikshitar, and he is probably the one who brought Sanskrit into the mainstream classical music. Almost every one of his compositions are in chaste Sanskrit, very, very sort of high-powered Sanskrit. And also some of his compositions are probably among the most difficult to master and learn in Carnatic music. I mean, some of them. There are also the simpler ones. There's a whole spread. But yes, I mean, making Sanskrit, bringing it into the mainstream musical tradition was certainly Muthuswami Dikshita's contribution. It's not that Sanskrit was not employed for musical compositions earlier. They were. I mean, like we had Jayadeva, Narayana Tirtha, and people like that. But then, I mean, they were sort of, I guess, fringe attempts in some sense. A bulk of music was in the local vernacular languages. In fact, there was people strongly believed that Sanskrit, because of its how formal it is, it's not exactly amenable to a musical form. Okay, and it was it was sort of Muthuswami Dikshita's genius that really brought Sanskrit right into Carnatic music. Okay. And his death anniversary, he passed away in the early 1800s, happens to be on the Deepavali day. So, sort of as a tribute to him, I just picked two compositions of his. The first one is a pretty long composition, and this is the end of the composition. Daksha Sikshana Daksha Tara Suralakshana Vidhi Vilakshana Lakshya Lakshana Bahu Vichakshana Sudha Bhakshana Guru Kataksha Vikshana Akshayalinga Vibho. The word ksha, the way he has used it in such a cascade of the kshas coming in, and when you sing it has a brilliant electrifying effect. And so he has actually brought in a lot of these kind of things, and the sort of the holistic merger of poetry and music is which Muthuswami Dikshita brought about was certainly unparalleled. And this is another interesting example, and this is also, it's a prayer to Saraswati, so I guess that's a good thing to end with. Shri Saraswati Namostute Varade Paradevate Shripati Gauripati Guru Vinute Vidhiyuvate Vasanatraya Vivarjita Vara Muni Bhavita Murte Vasavadya Khila Nirjara Vara Vitarana Bahukirte Dhara Hasayuta Mukhamburuhe Adbhuta Charanamburuhe Sansara Bhityapahe Sakala Mantrakshala Guhe. Now, this is a pretty simple composition. It's actually used often as a composition that is taught during the beginning stages of somebody's journey into Carnatic music. So maybe when someone is 2-3 years into learning Carnatic music, this you would be taught compositions like this. So there are simple ones, and the reason I wanted to show this is another interesting thing that that Muthuswami Dikshita brought about. So he also introduced a lot of what I would probably call as musico-literary ornamentation into his compositions. Like this one is sung in the raga called Arabhi and Carnatic music. And so what he has done is very cleverly included the name of the raga and the composition itself. So if you see the last line, Sansara Bhityapahe Sakala Mantrakshara Guhe. Sansara Bhiti Apahe. So one who blows away the fear of getting mired in the sansaram. And Sakala Mantrakshara Guhe, one who's the abode of all the aksharas and all the mantras. Okay. Now, so if you look at it carefully, Sansara Bhi, Arabhi, which is the name of the ragam, the raga in which it is sung. So the raga is a musical feature, but that he has very cleverly weaved into this composition. And this is not just an isolated thing. You see the things like this, which are sort of musical notions, being weaved into the poetry of the composition. Okay, he has done it in various compositions of his. So I thought I'll end with just a highlight of things like this. So all this, I guess, goes to show, which probably doesn't require a proof, but this is just a highlight of the sort of flexibility that the Sanskrit as a language offers, and it's probably not a surprise that it is still such a vibrant language, and there is if you look around, there is tremendous amount of literature that is being produced of all kinds, and it's not, and much of it, unlike what we might have imagined, is quite a departure from the classical Sanskrit tradition. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I had to say.
So thank you very much, Professor Raghavan. Thank you very much. I think wonderful session. Sanskrit has always seemed to be a very distant language to me, definitely, and I'm sure to many of us. And modern for Sanskrit is probably 1,000 years back. But what you have done is also brought the U.S. elections and everything that's going on around us. So it's actually it's wonderful to see it so alive and kicking, and such an interesting way of informing us and breaking some of our myths around this language. Thank you very much again for such an interesting session. Uh, I see some comments. Initially, there was a comment from Professor Shiva and Meenakshi uh, uh, around the Ghazal Geetam that you had said.
Yeah.
It reminded them of Shiva, Meenakshi, if you're around, and if you want to comment, or if you want to
Yeah, it was like
share anything.
Aigiri
Yeah.
Nandini.
Yeah,
I also said that it's rhyming to the Mahishasura Mardini Stotram.
Yeah, and the whole host of compliments of the wonderful session you've conducted, and there also hopes that Sanskrit continues to live. Uh, Sanskrit and German was why Max Weber took Sanskrit to the West. That's Professor Balaji. So thank you very much. I think we have exceeded time, but it was all worth it. So thank you again, Professor Raghavan. Thank you for such a wonderful session.
Thanks.
Hopefully someday we'll have a Sanskrit. We will probably start some Sanskrit courses in the institute, given the kind of contemporary literature that you're all aware of. So thank you very much for joining, and we hope to see you again. We'll keep you posted of the next session. Thank you, Professor Raghavan, for your interesting talk today.
Thank you.